Hi there, welcome to another episode of Needlepoint TV. Today we're going to take a look at the difference between Gloriana silk ribbon and River Silk's silk ribbon, and I'm going to share with you some reasons why you might want to use one in one situation and the other in the other situation. So, what do you say we go ahead and dive in? First of all, it's always great fun for me to see where you're watching from. So make sure you share where you are in this great, big, wonderful world that we all live in. And while you're at it, let me know too if you've ever used silk ribbon on a needlepoint canvas. Just type it into the comments, and I'll love to hear. And if you haven't, then you might be tempted to try after we get finished with this little time together here today. So, first of all, the two that we're going to talk about. River Silk's silk ribbon and Gloriana silk ribbon. So I need to give you just a little bit of information, first of all, and that is, well, just basically about the two different companies. I had a needlepoint store for 14 years, and I carried both kinds of ribbon in my shop. Actually, we carried a couple of others as well, just not as many. But what you'll find as a stitcher is that you're going to most likely find the River Silk's silk ribbon in needlepoint stores more frequently than you will the Gloriana. Couple of reasons for that. River Silks is a bigger company, and they've been around in the silk ribbon business a bit longer than Gloriana. I will say too that Gloriana ribbons and threads and all of their beautiful products are dyed by hand. So that means that it's a much smaller operation. And so it's more, I won't necessarily call it a cottage industry, but it's not far off from that. So as opposed to River Silks, which is actually a relatively large manufacturing or production company. So for those of you who watched my episode of Needlepoint TV earlier this month, we talked about the basics of silk ribbon. I shared with you the different widths that are available, how many yards come on a card or on a spool, however it comes packaged, all kinds of things like that. So if you haven't had a chance to watch that video, make sure that you check out that one too. It was early in April, let's just put it that way, early April 2022 when that video was released. So without further ado, let's talk just a second. I'm going to give you a rundown here. And if you're taking notes, you might want to just jot a couple of these things down just as a general guideline for when you might use one over the other. So first of all, Gloriana silk ribbon, like I said just a minute ago, is painted by hand or dyed by hand. So it has a more painterly look to it. It's got a good bit more depth of color because it is hand painted or painted, hand dyed, excuse me. Let me share. I've pulled up their website so that you can actually see what their threads or ribbons look like. And so let's see, let me make sure I've got the right one here. So this, you can see here that there is, and some of these colors it's easier to see on than others. This one is a great example, Purple Night Sky. You can see the depth and variation of color on that particular sample of ribbon. As you scroll on down, you can see poinsettia is another one. Valentine's is another one. You can absolutely see the depth of color, the variation of color, and you can see how using one of these ribbons from Gloriana would be akin to using an overdyed or a multicolored thread like watercolors or water lilies. In fact, the colors of Gloriana silk ribbon are dyed to match the Gloriana 12-strand silk thread. That being said, there aren't just a ton of colors. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of colors, but there are not as many colors of the Gloriana as there are of the River Silks. So that does limit you just a little bit. You can see some of these have more than one color in them. I tend to gravitate, just like I do with the overdyed or multicolored threads, I tend to gravitate towards those that are more monochromatic as opposed to those that have lots of different colors in them, just because I feel like it's a more subtle statement of color. There are certainly reasons to want, and I'm just going to keep scrolling through here to see if I find one that's really wildly variegated in color. Well, for this one, for example, this one, Highland Garden. Now, that would actually be really pretty for a hydrangea. Like if you had a hydrangea bush on a canvas and you wanted to get in some of those blues and greens and purples that you see in hydrangea flowers, this would be a good option for you. But I really, like I said, personally tend to gravitate towards those that are more monochromatic just because I feel like it's easier to control what's going to happen with the ribbon or with the thread. Sometimes when you get things that are very wildly variegated, that means there's 3 or 4 or 5 different colors in a particular skein or card, however the thread is put up. You don't necessarily always know just exactly where that really distinct change of color is going to happen. So it's a lot easier to control the look when you don't have a tremendous amount of variation in color within the same skein or card of thread. Now, this fall foliage would be another one that would be a really good choice for if you had a fall scene and you had a tree that you wanted to show in varying stages of changing color for the fall. This one would be a good one. It's not so crazy as some of the ones that I've seen from other companies. So Monet's Pond. Now this one, this would be another good example of one that you could use on a hydrangea bush, because you've got the flowers when they first, I guess, flower out. Some of the petals are more green and then they turn blue. And then they actually turn back to more of a greenish color. So yeah, you could definitely use some of those. There's just a plain called hydrangea. So but you get the idea here. A lot of these are very subtle in their coloration, but there are a handful that are more variegated. So let me stop my share there and hop back over here so I can see you all again. So to keep in mind, just some general information about Gloriana, and I've got my notes here, so I'm going to refer to these. They are 4 yards on a card, or it comes with a little header card that the ribbon is then, there's a 4 yards are pulled off, and then they like fold it back on itself and then run it through a little hole on the card so it's loose. It's kind of like this silken ribbon from Thread Gatherers. It's kind of put up like this. So that's how, and I don't have any Gloriana that hasn't been prepped. So I'll show you how I do that. I'll have to use this thread gatherer to do it with, but I'll show you how I prep. And it's especially, I think, important when you have one that is a hand painted like this, or a hand dyed like this, because you want to maintain that flow of color on your ribbon just like you do on the multicolored threads like watercolors. So what I typically do, and I'll just go ahead and do it while we're here chatting about this, when you take it off the card, you're going to find that in the case of the Gloriana, it's not pre-cut. So you're going to end up, well, there are 2 pieces with this thread gatherer. So that's going to, and I don't know how much is on. So you're going to get a little bit of a bonus here. You're going to learn about thread gatherer too. Thread gatherer has 4 yards as well. So this is 2 2-yard pieces. But what I like to do is I'll take the card that the ribbon came on, and then I'll wrap it around the card itself so that I know what color it is that I'm going to be working with. And I don't cut the pieces in advance, because you want to be able to maintain that flow of color. And if you start chopping up short pieces, or start chopping the ribbon up into short pieces, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to just cut the next length off that you need so that you can maintain that flow of color that the artist or the thread dyer has established in that particular colorway. Now you'll notice this is really wrinkly looking, and you can use a flat iron for your hair on the lowest setting, to iron your ribbon to flatten it out. You could also use an iron, like an iron that you iron your clothes with. That would work too. And you can also use a small craft iron. A small craft iron will they a lot of them are made for quilting. They have a little triangular head, and it is literally very small. So you can just iron the ribbon with that. But I do like to iron the ribbon because I think it makes your stitches look prettier. And especially if you're doing a stitch that is like the Japanese ribbon stitch, where you want that ribbon to be flat and smooth. And so that's the reason that I like to iron my ribbon beforehand. Now this is actually, well, I think this is 4 millimeter. Hold on one second. Let me look at this and see if I can tell what this is. Yes, this is 4 millimeter. Sorry about that. Sometimes the 2 millimeter is it's really, really skinny. And so I get my millimeters mixed up. But again, the Gloriana ribbon, you have talking about it, and I'll just go ahead and continue to wrap this around. Again, I'm just wrapping it around the card long ways so that, I know what color I'm working with or what color it is that I have, because the card identifies the color number and the color name. And so something that you would probably want to do, I don't ever, when I'm working with ribbon, I don't ever cut a piece off and attach it to the card. I just try to save some. I just try to save some so I can attach it at the end so that I know what color it is. Because silk ribbon tends to be a little bit more expensive. So I don't want to, just cut a piece just for the sake of having a sample of it, because I may need it. And generally speaking, the wider the ribbon, the more expensive it's going to be, and the less yardage you're going to have on the card. And this holds true with the Gloriana as well. So the less yardage you're going to have on the narrow, on the wider than you do on the narrow. The Gloriana does come in 4 millimeter, 7 millimeter, and 13 millimeter. Now, at last check, when I checked their website, all the colors except for one come in all. No, let me back up. All of the colors, yes, all of the colors except for one come in all three widths. There's one color that is available only in 4 millimeter. So they have, and let me look at my numbers, 153 colors. And then there is one color that's only available in that 4 millimeter width, which you're going to find is going to be the most commonly used width in silk ribbon, especially for needlepoint. And if you're trying to find a source for silk ribbon, one thing I would suggest is if your local needlepoint store doesn't carry it, or if you don't have a local needlepoint store, check quilt shops, because a lot of times quilt shops carry crazy quilting supplies, and you'll find silk ribbon many times in shops that carry crazy, that's a mouthful, that carry crazy quilting supplies. So anytime you're trying to, to determine what kind of ribbon you want to use, whether you want to use a hand painted one with the depth of color or a solid one, you have to think about what the feel is for the canvas. So I pulled a couple of cards here, or I guess they're really spools. This is, let's see, this one is 13 millimeter, but let me see what we have here. Uh-oh, this may all be one color. No, this is not. This is, so if you're going to do something that is heavily shaded, so if you have a canvas that has flowers and the flowers are very shaded, I would have a tendency to lean toward the Gloriana ribbon, because the Gloriana ribbon is, it does have that more painterly look to it, whereas the thread or the ribbons from River Silks are more solid in color. So let me show you quickly now. I'm going to share my screen so we can take a look at the website for River Silks, and you can see the difference between the two. So let me hop over here. And uh-oh, that's the page that tells you where you can get them. So let's go back to products, colors. So you can see these are actually photographs of the actual ribbon itself. You can barely tell it. Let me back up, or go here rather. As we go through, you can see it a little bit better on some of the darker colors, but these are actually samples of the colors of the ribbon. And if I get, yeah, down here toward the bottom, these are their ribbons that are multiple colors, but they're really not. It's really almost like spatter painting. It's not the same technique that's used for applying color to the Gloriana. So if I go back up here and go to the 100 to the 101 to the 200s, you can see, you've got two colors on one ribbon. Basically, you've got the pale blue and the darker blue, or you've got sort of a chartreuse green with the little green speckles. It is truly more of a speckle or a spatter type technique for applying the extra color to the ribbon. You're not going to find a River Silks ribbon that I know of that's going to be more than one color on a ribbon. And this actually stitches up quite differently than your, especially something like that where you've got two colors, complementary colors on the same ribbon. So you're absolutely going to get a different look with something like this than you're going to have on a ribbon that does have that more, I don't know, artistic flow of color applied to the ribbon. All right, so let me hop back over here and we'll take a peek. So River Silks comes in 5.5 yards on each spool. This is a spool. So this is a spool of 13 millimeter ribbon. And this you would also most likely, when you pull it off, I have one that's open. So let me grab it really quickly. I can show you what it looks like when you go to unwrap it off the card, or excuse me, off the spool. You can see it has a little bit of a wrinkle or a fold in it where it was on the spool. But so you're going to want to treat this, iron it, run it through a flat iron or something. It's not as bad as those that have been kind of crunched and then tied onto the little cards that you hang on the wall, but it does still need to have a little bit of treatment done to it to make it easier to manage. The other thing I will say is that well, one of the advantages that I think to this is that you don't have to pre-wrap anything. All you have to do is unwind and pull off however much you want to use for your particular situation on your project. So you're not having to, do really any prep work with this aside from the ironing, which you're going to do on both kinds anyway. So I like the way that River Silks puts their ribbon up. I think it's much easier to keep things neat. I think it's much easier to keep them clean and tidy, and you're less likely to damage that ribbon than you are this other. All right. So again, I mentioned River Silks is more readily available than Gloriana, and let's see what else. Oh yeah. So this is I don't know. It matters. Absolutely, it matters. Each person is going to be different as to how much it matters. But Gloriana does tend to be more expensive. For starters, because you get less on the individual put up or individual card, you get 1.5 yards less. But that can actually be attributed to the fact that it is a more labor intensive process to color the ribbon in the Gloriana line than it is the River Silks, because the River Silks are actually dyed pretty much the way any other kind of thread is dyed. It's dipped or it's saturated with color, and so it's not it's not a hand application of color. So I'm going to scroll through here and see. Yeah, we've got several people who have used silk ribbon before. So a couple of things again, just to compare and contrast. You've got your Gloriana that is more of of an artistic or painterly look, and I would tend to use those on canvases that are more shaded. And then you've got your solid colors and your river silks, and then you do have those that are multicolored. But I tend to use those more on in places where maybe there's not so much shading, or if I have a small area on a canvas where I want to use a little bit of silk ribbon, maybe it's just a little spray of flowers and I just want to do some small French knots or colonial knots or something like that, maybe some little lazy daisies, just some small, just a little touch of silk ribbon. I would probably be more inclined to use the river silks. And then both come in 4 millimeter, 7 millimeter, and 13 millimeter. Both ribbons are of the same ilk in that they're woven and they both have a selvage edge on the side. So that's going to mean that both of them are going to stand up relatively well to being used on needlepoint canvas. Now, you do want to use shorter pieces. And again, I would refer you back to the video I did earlier this month on the differences between the different widths and what needles to use and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you check out that video. And I'll make sure too that I'll link to it down here below this video in the notes section. Excuse me. But that is, so they have those similarities. Again, Gloriana only 4 yards as opposed to the 5.5 that you get with river silks. More colors of river silks than there are available in Gloriana. However, if you're working on a project where you're using the Gloriana 12-strand silk thread, then you have 9 times out of 10, now I know there are variations in dye lots, but 9 times out of 10, you're going to get pretty darn close with the ribbon that is dyed to match the Gloriana silk thread. So that's a bonus. I would call that a pro in the Gloriana. If we're doing a comparison and contrast, and we're doing pros and cons, I would count that in the pro column. And then as far as, the actual structure of it, again, the same. You're not going to find that one's going to wear out more quickly than the other, but you do want to make sure that that you're using the right materials, the right tools, the right needles, the right. If you will want to use a laying tool when you're working with ribbon, all those kinds of things. So I am. Let's see if there's anything else that I need to share. I don't think so. I think we've pretty much covered it. So yeah. I think you should give it a try. I think that if you've never worked with silk ribbon before, you'll find it to be very forgiving, really fun to do, and you can cover a lot of ground really fast. It's not like having to work each little individual intersection of your canvas in tent stitch. You can actually do the silk ribbon embroidery stitches are, first of all, they're very forgiving and they do go rather quickly. So you can cover a lot of ground really fast and it looks absolutely beautiful. It is a little bit more delicate than the ribbon itself is not, but the stitches can be. So you want to make sure whenever you're using any kind of a silk ribbon technique on a project that it's going to be something that's not going to get a whole lot of handling. It does vary from stitch to stitch. Some of the stitches are more delicate than others, but you do want to keep that in mind. So I tend to do silk ribbon on things that are not going to get a lot of handling, maybe a pillow for a guest room bed or something that's going to be framed. I've used it on stand-ups, but anything that's going to get a lot of handling where the ribbons might get snagged and the stitches might get pulled out, that's the danger in, excuse me, in using silk ribbon techniques on really on anything. It's not just on needlepoint, but it's just silk ribbon embroidery in general. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all again next week. Thanks for joining me, and until then, happy stitching. Bye for now.